Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to today's YouTube Live. We are going to be talking about catching up on progress notes today. So this is one of the most common concerns that I hear from therapists is managing paperwork. How do I find the time to do it? When I fall behind, how do I catch up on notes? So we will talk about all the things today. In case you don't know who I am and you somehow ended up on this video, I'm Dr. Maelisa McCaffrey, founder of QA Prep, author of Stress-Free Documentation, that book back there. And today I am going to lay out all the details for you about what commonly keeps therapists not only falling behind in paperwork, not only what leads to them falling behind in paperwork, but what keeps them in that cycle of falling behind, catching up, falling behind, catching up. So we're going to go through that. And spoiler alert, it's not actually time management issues that are the most common reason people fall behind. We're going to talk about if you are behind, how do you create a catch-up plan? And one that's actually effective in ending that cycle. And we're going to talk about what is the most important thing you can do this week to get those progress notes done. We will have some time for Q&A if we want to do that. And I will also share with you information about the summer paperwork blitz. So another spoiler alert, one of the easiest, simplest ways to start catching up on notes, to keep from falling behind in notes, is to use whatever community you have around you. And co-working is a major way that the people in my community have found works and is very helpful because you know that everybody else is there with you. And so even just logging in and seeing a bunch of faces who are also doing notes together helps you see, oh, I'm not alone in this, right? And then people sometimes ask questions, and it's a great way to do things. So next week, we are doing the summer paperwork blitz, which we do most summers. We didn't do it last year. And it's a week of co-working together where you can get notes done with other clinicians, and experiencing the community of being with other people is really transformative in eliminating the shame you might have around notes and moving beyond that into just getting some notes done. So that is what we'll be doing. All right, so, and I will put the link there in the chat, and also if you're watching the recording, it'll be in the description below, so check that out. And even if you're watching this video later, when you sign up, you'll get a sample catch-up plan. So if you are struggling with how to catch up on notes, go ahead and sign up, and you may not be able to join us right away, but you can do the catch-up plan and get started soon. All right, so let's dig in. So for today, we're going to start off with talking about the common reasons that therapists fall behind in their paperwork. And I use a framework called the QUOTE framework, so it makes it really easy to remember. And that stands for questioning, others, time management, and emotions. So these are really the four major things that I have found in working with clinicians who fall behind in notes are leading to falling behind and staying behind in paperwork. And you might experience more than one of these. You might experience all of them. You might experience different ones at different times in life. But most clinicians, I would say, the vast majority of clinicians throughout their whole career do fall behind at some point. And that might not be until you have been seasoned and you've been working for 40 years, or it might be right away from day one. But most people will experience it at some point, and it's usually due to one of these four things. So let's dig in. So questioning and understanding. So out of that QUOTE framework, QU, that is if you just really feel like I don't know how to do notes. I was never trained in how to do notes. I never got a course in it. I asked a supervisor for help and they told me I should know this already, or said they didn't know either, or just told me you're doing fine, just keep doing what you're doing. Anything that leads to questioning what you're writing. So this might be if you are writing notes and as you're sitting there, you're rewriting paragraphs or rewriting sentences, constantly deleting things. And this type of person, often it will take a long time to write notes. So it might take you 20, 25, 30 minutes just to write one progress note. Obviously, That's not sustainable, right? If you have 2 clients a week, maybe, but most people have more clients than that. And so if you're trying to see 15 or 20 clients in a week and it's taking you half an hour for every single progress note, um, then that creates a recipe for disaster, really. You're not going to get all those notes done. And the process of writing notes will feel very, very stressful and will take a lot of effort. That's the other thing with people who spend a lot of time questioning or feel like they have no understanding of how to write notes. They might be writing notes. Um, and even if I can reduce the amount of time, it might still just feel so stressful. So if, or even if you keep the same amount of time, but I can help you feel more confident in writing your notes, the task, when it doesn't feel so stressful, you're less likely to avoid it, number one. But number two, you'll have more energy if you feel like you know what you're doing, right? So, what is the solution if you are struggling with this? And like I said, you might have this and one or all of the rest as well. So, if you really struggle with just questioning what you're writing constantly and feel like you never got training, the easy answer is get some training, right? So I do have a course that you can sign up for that's also called Stress-Free Documentation. If the course is outside of your price range, the book is very affordable, and I did that on purpose, right? You can buy this book. Pretty much anybody should be able to access this book, Stress-Free Documentation, and it walks you through all of the things you never learned in grad school. And I guide you in why I have different recommendations, right? So you can also check out the playlists that I have on this YouTube channel. All of these videos are free. So you have lots of training available to you, regardless of, what level of access you might have to different price points. So check out the YouTube videos, check out the book. And then I do have a course by the same name if you want something more in depth. And that also gets you access to co-working sessions with me and to Q&A sessions once a quarter. So you get your personal questions answered. But I promise you, giving yourself the grace to get the training that you never received, or to get better training if you have gotten lots of training and feel like it never really matched with what you needed. Start with the book. It's very easily accessible and it gives you all the templates. So for a lot of people, you might get the training, but you need to see it in person, or you feel like you need to see notes written out. I have examples, I've got templates, and all of that is on purpose because I know how helpful that is to see these principles that are kind of ambiguous, literally put down on paper, right? So that's one, questioning and understanding for common reasons that people fall behind in paperwork. So number two is others. So what does that mean? That means worrying about all the other people who might read your notes. So even clinicians who feel pretty confident in their notes and feel like they can produce a good note often worry and might spend a lot of time worrying about who else is going to read this note. And typically that's one of three people that are the real scenarios and that clinicians are concerned about. And that is the client. So the client asking for their records and reading them themselves. That's an attorney. So whether that's through a subpoena or the client, some attorney reading those records, or an insurance company. So through an insurance audit. And obviously it's not the people themselves that clinicians are scared of. We're scared of the ramifications of these records being released, right? And so with this, it's really important to do some reality checking, which is something that I frequently do in the groups that I run and in consultations. It's not just about having an understanding of literally what to put in a progress note or what medical necessity means. It's an understanding of what is likely to happen if those scenarios occur. All right, number one, clients. If a client wants to access their notes, guess what? They can. They have the right to read their notes. In my opinion, they should have the right to read their notes, just like I believe I should have the right to my medical record if I want to see what my doctor wrote about a doctor's visit, right? In a similar way, clients absolutely can access their mental health notes. So it's important to know that and to write your notes with that in mind. So always think, would I write this way if my client was reading it, if my client was looking over my shoulder, or if I knew that they could see what I'm writing? Because the reality is they might. And in some scenarios, they likely will, right? So instead of worrying about what a client would think, let's just go in with the expectation that a client would have access to their notes and potentially would read their notes, and always write progress notes with that in mind. Related, if you see kids, always write notes with the expectation that both parents, regardless of custody battles, regardless of who has current custody, regardless of what the situation is, always write your notes, assuming that both parents could and will read the progress notes, because there's a high likelihood that they could at some point have access to that. We can get into this. There are specifics there about ages and who has access based on what state you live in, so that can vary. But keep that in mind when you're working with minors who wouldn't have the rights to their own records yet. So always thinking about, if our clients are reading their notes, that's not a bad thing. And I think we often frame it as if it is negative. And research shows that there's pretty overwhelmingly positive. It's overwhelmingly positive when clients do have access to their notes, when they read their notes, when it becomes a more collaborative process. And so, and absolutely, the world is kind of moving in that direction with technology and management. So let's just assume that's the case and write in a way that we know our client would feel respected. So who are the other people? So the other big one that therapists are frequently concerned about is attorneys, right? So what if there's a subpoena and some attorney is reading this record, or there's always this, nightmare scenario of, an open court case and it's televised and someone is reading your notes to you in the courtroom and you're on the stand. That's extremely unlikely to happen. And even without the big dramatic scenario of things being televised, it's still very unlikely to happen. It could, absolutely. That is a potential risk we all take. And there's so many things that have to happen in between. And a lot of that, again, actually has to do with talking with your clients about potential scenarios. So I have had lots of records requests and some subpoenas and things like that when I had my private practice. And the thing that I always considered was, what does my client want? What's best for my client? And I would frequently preempt these potential requests by talking with my client about what might happen as soon as they mentioned anything related to a court case or, workman's comp or wanting to sue their employer or whatever that might be. Then I would say, okay, if you talk with your attorney, they might ask if you're getting any mental health treatment or if you're seeing a therapist. And if you tell them yes, they likely will want to ask for your records. And that's just because they're doing their job. That is actually the job of a good attorney, is to get as much information about their client, about the things related to their client and that specific case as possible, right? So this is not attorneys being ruthless or nefarious necessarily. This is simply them doing their job. So I think, that doesn't mean they're all doing it in a great way, but for the most part, this is what they should be doing. So we don't need to, put those negative associations on the situation right away. And what's key is talking with your client about why their attorney would want that information, what might be useful, and letting your client know, hey, I can always write, for example, a case summary instead. It might not be in your best interest to have all of your mental health records open to the case, and then it opens up the potential that the other side of the other side's attorney could also access those notes, and things could be brought up. And so it's a good opportunity to both review with your client what's in their notes and what's in their record, what they're looking for, but then also to just remind them about, do they want their mental health records just out in the open and public? And the fact that there are other options. So most attorneys are not going to present that option to them because they just want all the info they can get. But if the client says, I really don't want my mental health records released, but my therapist said they could give you a summary letter, or my therapist said you could call and talk to them, that might be a better alternative where the attorney still gets the information they want, and they actually get to read through less. They don't want to pore over all of your individual progress notes, and then it meets the client's needs still, whatever those might be. So, thinking ahead and instead of like being scared of those scenarios and instead tackling them head on can actually help to mitigate a lot of the negative consequences that can happen from someone's mental health records being released. Obviously, to a certain point, we can only do what we can do, and you can't ignore a subpoena, but you can always assert privilege and hope that the judge would then respect your client's privacy as well. And remember that, your client does have the right to request their records. What's really important is that we talk with them about what those potential circumstances can be, and what their rights are as far as access to their records, and let them make those decisions. Okay, so the third scenario where other people are creating stress over you writing your progress notes, right? So that is an audit and insurance companies. And this can be very stressful. This can also be very easy to mitigate with a really good template. So what auditors want to see is very specific. And if you can make their job easy, they will love it. And then they will start actually looking through your notes pretty quickly. But you want to make it easy for them to find what it is they're looking for. What are auditors looking for? They are looking for reports of client progress on treatment goals, and they are looking for ongoing need, symptoms, impairments related to those treatment goals. Those are the two key things, right? There are other specific things that they want to look for. But as far as like the content, the clinical content of your progress notes, that's what they are trying to extrapolate from these wordy progress notes that we all write. And so if you can call it out and write it in a specific section, if you can highlight it, give it a headline, have it be its own section in the progress note. So you don't have to just use a SOAP note, for example. You could add in a section. So maybe it's subjective, objective assessment, medical necessity criteria, plan. If you can make it really easy for them to find that information, that will help in any audit. It will also help in the scenario if you are not asked to give all the individual progress notes, but you're asked to give some kind of a summary or to talk with a representative for the insurance company. Then it will help you to have that succinct, literally 1 or 2 sentences in that section and have it be called out. You can go through your own records, right, your client's records, and more easily find that information so that you can give a summary of that and speak to that specifically without avoiding all of the unnecessary fluff that an auditor is not looking for. So I have some sample progress statements, and I have another video we'll link to below in the description after this YouTube live, but definitely check that out. I call it a progress statement. Other people call it a medical necessity statement or different things. But the key here is you want to address always the client is still progressing in therapy it's worth paying for, and the client still has some symptoms and some impairments related to those symptoms, and so therapy is still worth paying for. That's what insurance wants to see, along with some other things, but that's the key that you want to show in each progress note. All right, so those are most of the other people that are commonly a concern, and that lead to us as therapists overthinking our notes and then falling behind in paperwork, right? So we've already done questioning and understanding other people. The next thing is time management in the quote framework. So time management is an issue for many therapists as far as, especially if you work in agency settings or in a practice where they have a specific number of clients you need to see. And I know when I first started as a therapist, especially, I worked in a setting where it was nearly impossible to meet all of the billing requirements and paperwork requirements and actually fit it in to the amount of hours we were supposed to be working, right? So I want to acknowledge that there are some very real time constraints related to time management and documentation. And when we have those scenarios, that's where we have to get creative. So the other thing with time management is that many people actually do quite well with progress notes when they're in an agency or a group setting. And then you move to private practice and you're your own boss and no one is looking over you and checking up on whether or not you've gotten your notes done. And that's when the struggle happens. That's a really common experience, that it can be very easy to fall behind because nobody knows you're behind, right? And then those are the people who book a consultation with me in a panic because somebody requested their records and they're like, oh my gosh, I haven't been doing notes for months or years or however long. So time management is a big thing. So some tips around time management. Obviously, this could be its own like training, but number one is actually put the time in your schedule. So many therapists schedule admin time for themselves, but then they try to fit in literally all the tasks outside of therapy into that admin time. And it is not nearly enough time to do your marketing, to do your continuing education, which is literally, hours and hours every year, to do any other certifications you're doing, to do case consultation and looking up information for helping clients, to do progress notes, to do billing, to revise your forms after a new year happens and there are new laws. We could go on and on, right? There are a ton of things that are not therapy that you're doing. And so being realistic about how much time that takes is very important. And most people simply don't know that until you're in private practice and you do have to kind of figure it out. And then what I think is very important as far as staying up on top of paperwork is schedule your notes time separately from other admin. If you can do even better by having, for example, marketing time, returning voicemails once a day, returning emails once a day, that kind of thing. This all depends on how much you like structure, how much flexibility you have in your schedule. But the more detail you can get about the common things that take up your admin time, the more you'll be able to effectively plan for where to put that time in your schedule and for how much. So a lot of therapists, I had this as a tip earlier, but a lot of therapists don't know how long it takes them to do a progress note. And so if you don't know how long it takes you to do progress notes, how are you going to plan for doing progress notes, right? And so that's something that you can figure out fairly simply by simply timing yourself today. So today, tomorrow, the next time you do progress notes, start timing yourself and then average out the amount of time it took to do all of those notes. And then you probably have a fairly good idea. I would say as long as you do about 6 notes, you'll have a good idea of the average time it takes you to write a progress note. And once you have that time, then you can plan effectively. And for some people, they find out, I thought notes took me a really long time because they stressed me out, but they actually only take 5 or 6 minutes. So that doesn't feel like a big deal. And for some people, that in itself is the catalyst to getting notes done, because now they know it only takes me 5 minutes. That doesn't feel overwhelming. For other people, they find out it does take me 25, 30 minutes to do a note. And that's a different story, right? So that is then looking at, why is it taking that long? Are there certain sections you're spending a lot of time on? Are there ways that you can create some starter phrases for yourself, use checkboxes, use cheat sheets? What is it that's taking up a lot of your time that you can, that we can then work ahead so that you're saving yourself time there and saving yourself mental effort as well. But if you don't know that, then you're driving blind and you don't know how to create an effective plan. So really timing yourself writing notes is one of the most important things that you can do to help yourself stay up on notes and also to help yourself catch up. All right, so that's time management. We could go into a lot of things with that, but I would say timing yourself is the biggest thing, so you can plan ahead and actually have it on your schedule as a separate thing from other administrative tasks that you're doing. All right, the last one in our quote framework, so common reasons for falling behind in paperwork, is emotions. And this is something I never would have, necessarily picked out until I had started working with therapists on this topic. And it's a big one. It's a really, really big one. And it becomes very cyclical in a negative way, where there are things that lead to documentation being stressful, right? So a lack of knowledge about what to write, negative feedback from a supervisor without support to improve, having a bad audit, being in private practice and not realizing that you needed more time to do your notes. There are lots of things that can then lead to, as you sit down to doing notes, they feel difficult to do. Then as they feel difficult to do, you start to feel bad about yourself, because most therapists I talk to who struggle with notes have the same thought, which is, I should know this already. I should know how to do this. And yet so many people don't, right? Because how could you if you haven't had any training or haven't had good training? But so many therapists then get stuck in this loop of feeling bad and blaming themselves for all the problems they're having with notes, and then they avoid doing notes. And that avoidance is really one of the major things that contributes to people falling behind, because it feels like a failure every time you sit down to write a note. It doesn't feel good enough. It feels awful. It doesn't feel like it relates to the session. And so then it's something you want to avoid. And then all of a sudden you're worried about your notes. And people will literally tell me they're up late at night, worrying about their notes and how they haven't done them. And then they go to sit down to write the notes, and the emotions, again, are so overwhelming that you can't even start. So it's a really, really big one that actually does impact whether or not people get notes done. And so anyone here, if you're a supervisor, I think that's really important to remember and acknowledge. If you're trying to help clinicians, that the emotional part of it is actually very, very big. And a lot of it has to do with beating yourself up, feeling like you should know this already, beating yourself up that you then didn't do whatever you're supposed to do, and it becomes this awful cycle that is almost never helpful. Right? So always remember, when you start to get into those emotions and start to beat yourself up, practice self-compassion. And even if you're struggling to practice self-compassion, remember, this beating yourself up is really not motivating. It's not effective in getting the task done. Instead, look at what might be leading to these other things, and how can we address that. So, all right. So I actually do want to say, lastly, with emotions related to progress notes, the other thing, other than kind of beating yourself up, feeling bad about notes, is also emotions that are heavy from a session. So maybe you have a bunch of clients who have complex trauma, and that's a specialty of yours, but that also means that your sessions tend to be more heavy and more intense, and maybe they're longer, or you have a specialty in working with people experiencing domestic violence. And so a lot of your notes involve risk management, and those are always simply going to be longer notes, right? Or you work with kids, and so a lot of your documentation is also talking with parents or communicating around scheduling and all of that. So there are a lot of negative emotions about the client that can come up when you sit down to write the note. And on the one hand, writing the note can help you feel complete. So that will help you kind of set the session down and be done with it. And that can also make it very difficult to sit down and address the session by finishing the note. So if you want to avoid a session or a certain client, then often you'll also avoid writing notes for that person. So if you find that you're really on top of notes for certain clients and not for others, this might be something to look at, is that I find that a lot of times people will be like on top of their insurance clients, but not their private practice clients. But the other reason you might be on top of notes for some versus not with others is if you are experiencing maybe a lack of confidence around certain clients, or just having a negative experience, or their cases feel very heavy. That can be a common reason. So those are all, and that's a very different approach that is going to require more things like joining a consultation group or getting some supervision or individual consultation so that you have the support you need around that, or even potentially referring clients out or not taking on certain types of clients in the future, right? That's a very different solution than, for example, the time management one. And so that's why I like using this quote framework to identify why you might be falling behind in your notes, because it helps you identify what could be the most effective solution and where to start. So just to recap, that was questioning or understanding what goes in the note, worrying about other people who read the notes, managing your time, and then all the emotions related to documentation. It's typically one of those 4 things. All right, so now that we have an understanding of why people fall behind in notes and some solutions for those specific things, actually, I will look at a couple of questions, and then we'll look at how do you create a catch-up plan that is actually effective in ending this whole cycle. Because lots of people have fallen behind and then catch up, but then you fall behind again and catch up again. And so we want to stop that cycle so that you don't have to keep worrying about it. Let's see. Okay, so we had a couple of questions come in. Let's see, and they're fairly specific, so I think I will wait until the end. Well, the first one is, but then Isela said, do you recommend using templates with some checkboxes? Would this be an issue if audited? So good question, Isela, and I actually do have a YouTube video specific to this that I will link below. But to answer that question quickly, I love checkboxes. I love personalized checkboxes. So as an example, most EHRs will give you a template or a variety of templates. A lot of them will have checkboxes as options for interventions. But the interventions will be things like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness. That's not going to cut it in an insurance audit because that's a whole theory. That's not an intervention, right? That's 1,000 interventions. So no, that's not good enough. But if you have checkboxes that say, challenged cognitive distortions, or even challenged cognitive distortions related to, or explored emotions around, and then you kind of fill in the blank. I like using checkboxes as a fill in the blank type of option so that you can keep things very specific, but you're not worried about producing the information while you're writing, and it keeps it unique to the client and to that session. So that's what is the common concern around using checkboxes, is that it keeps things too generic and really basic. But if you personalize them a lot more, don't use the ones that you find in a lot of EHRs. Those tend to be very, very basic and it's just going to look like the exact same note every single week. And it's not going to address the medical necessity components. But if you make sure you're addressing the medical necessity components and that you are personalizing those checkboxes a little bit more, so it doesn't just say CBT, I think they can be very effective. And they are typically not an issue when you're audited if you use them that way. If you have a template that is that more generic checkbox, I have seen that be a problem. People have passed audits with my templates, which are available in the book. And I think it's because they really focus on being very personalized. The other thing to consider is that when you set up a template in your EHR, regardless of what EHR you use, the vast majority of them, so let's say you have 40 potential, I wouldn't recommend that many, but let's say you have 40 potential interventions listed on your template, right? And they're as checkboxes. So you can go in and just check. You check off like 4 of them. Most EHRs will only show the 4 that you select. They won't show the whole list. And so nobody even knows that you're using checkboxes. Typically, they will organize them as bullet points instead. And so it actually looks on the back end. And this is something I've kind of shifted with my example templates. So for example, I have a progress note template. It has all the options. And then when I give the examples, I was showing all the options. But most EHRs don't produce the finished note that way. They only show what you selected. And that makes the note much more reasonable, like 1 or 2 pages versus 8 pages or something crazy. And it just looks very organized, neat, clean, and very easy to read. So I would also emphasize that point. And then Andre, we'll get to your question at the end. It's not necessarily related to these specifically, but since I already mentioned the templates, thank you for that question, Isela, because that does come up a lot. Okay, so how to create a catch-up plan that's effective in ending the cycle of falling behind. So there's 2 options, kind of 2 main options that I have. And then I'll give you some little side quests if you want to do that. And really, there's no wrong way. Just create a plan, right? But I will give you some options based on how detailed or type A you want to be about it. Or if you're more the type where you're like, I'm so behind, I'm so embarrassed, I want to avoid this, ignore it, but I kind of want to tackle it. I'll give you an option that doesn't require all the detail. So the first thing you'll want to do regardless is that strategy I talked about before. Time yourself writing notes, because that will help with creating a catch-up plan. It will also help you with creating a plan for staying caught up. So you got to know how long it takes you to write a progress note. I don't recommend timing yourself with past notes. So do notes that from like this week, very recent time frame. And like I said, do at least 6 notes, write them, time yourself on each note, average out the time, and then you have an idea of how long you will need for each note, right? So that will help you a lot. Okay, so option 1 is the most detailed. So option 1 is you're literally going to count up all of the notes that you have due. Then you are going to multiply that times however long it takes you to write a note. We'll do some very simple math here. Let's say I have 4 notes to catch up on and it takes me 20 minutes for each note. Then that is going to be 80 minutes, right? So you're doing that, but at a larger scale, right? So maybe it only takes you 5 minutes, but maybe you have 100 notes to do. Maybe you have thousands of notes to do. I've worked with people there, so don't feel like you're the only one. I would say most therapists, so do not judge yourself based on where you are here. Everyone has a different scenario. Some people have these notes half done, not half done. But I really have worked with people who have thousands of notes due and people who have like 50 notes due and they're super stressed out too. Most people I work with probably have like 300-ish notes that they're working on. So, multiply that times however long it takes you to write a note, and then you'll get probably a bigger number than you want to see. That will be how much time you need, right? So you're going to, change those minutes. Like I said, 80 minutes for me would be an hour and 20 minutes. So you'll know how long is it going to take me to catch up in literal time. And then you can simply plan that into your schedule. For most people, that number, when they get it, it's overwhelming. It's stressful. So the next option will give you an option. If you don't want to find that number, that's totally fine. But if you want to be very realistic and purposeful about it, having that number will give you a good reality. And so then you know how to plan. So for example, let's say it's going to take you 25 hours to catch up on notes. That's probably not going to happen this month. And guess what? That's okay. You don't need to catch up this month. Most of you don't. So some of you might be here because you have some kind of deadline. That's a different story, right? But for most therapists that I work with, it's just I'm behind for whatever reason. This has really stressed me out in this moment and has been stressing me out for a while, but there's been some catalyst. I want to tackle this now. And so it's going to take 25 hours. It's okay to be realistic about that. And maybe you have younger kids and you have a spouse that also works and you fit in these clients during times that work for both of your schedules. And you are like hanging on, right? And just trying to do this thing, this life thing in this phase of life that you're in. You don't have a lot of flexibility in your time, and you don't have extra time, right? And so that's okay. Maybe you just plan for 2 hours a month, and that's not going to get you caught up by the end of the summer, but it will get you caught up in a year. And the reality is, if you don't make that plan, you're going to be back here next year. But if you go ahead and make that plan that is realistic, that you can actually stick with, then it will happen. And for a lot of people, that might mean 1 Saturday a month for the next few months, where you have 3 hours or 2 hours or 8 hours that you work and get things done. So whatever that might be, but look at it in a longer term, because I find most people, they're kind of motivated and they're like, okay, I want to create this catch-up plan. But realistically, if you spend all this time over the next 2-3 weeks catching up, you're not going to do any of the notes from this week. And then you're just going to be back where you started next month. So we want to avoid that by creating a longer term plan they can stick with, and that is grounded in reality of what your schedule is, and what you can manage, and that's not going to overwhelm you. So that is the most detailed plan you can do. And if you sign up for the Summer Paperwork Blitz, which is, the link is in the chat right now, you will get a catch-up plan, a sample, a template for a catch-up plan. So it'll walk you through that whole process. Okay, so let's say you are, I would say like most therapists that I work with actually, and you're like, nope, I don't want to know the number. That's terrifying. I'm embarrassed. I don't even want to know it myself. You don't have to have the number. All you need to do is write a list out of all of your clients, their names, and then create your schedule. So you still have to have that schedule set for yourself of when you're catching up, and you just know, okay, maybe you think, you know what, it's probably hundreds of notes and I don't like that. Okay, then give yourself one day a month for the next year that you'll be working on these catch-up notes. And when you log in to do that, you're just going to pick client A from the list, or maybe client D feels easier to start with and you start with client D. There's really no wrong answer. You just pick a client from that list and you start working on their notes. So you'll have less guidance on how long it might take you, but it'll give you a place to start and something you can do without feeling overwhelmed by the huge number of notes that you might have due. If you do want a strategy for triaging which clients to start with, I recommend that as a general rule. So look at your client list that you've created, maybe one or two right off the bat, oh, yep, those are the ones I'm a little uncomfortable about, either because they're high risk or because that they might have a records request. Do those first, prioritize them. The other strategy is you can prioritize starting with insurance clients and then do private pay clients after that. Another strategy is you can just do the fastest ones first. So maybe just looking at the list, you'll know you don't need to see all the individual numbers of notes due for every client to know, like, that's a newer client I started with just a couple months ago. They're going to have fewer notes to write. Let me start off with them so I can cross them off the list and start with a win. So there's really no wrong place to start, but those are some strategies there. All right, so the other ways that you can do this that I have seen people use is you can just write one note a day. So obviously all of this depends on your time and schedule, but if you're a little bit more quick with writing notes, this might work where you just say, I'm just going to do one backup note a day, right? Like one note for that I need to catch up on every single day. And then other people do this where they say, when I log in to write, client A's note from today's session, I will also write a note that is overdue, right? A note that's not done yet. And so there are certain people who use that strategy. And so there's no wrong answer here. It's about knowing what will motivate you. And the first thing you try might not work. That's okay. Try it and then go on to the next strategy. The key here is making sure that you have the time blocked out in your schedule, and that you at least have that client list of names so that so you're not staring at a blank screen and trying to figure out what to do when you sit down and start. All right. And then Andre also had a question about AI. Yes, I absolutely will answer that. Okay, so let's get into this will be kind of related to this, Andre, so then I'll answer your questions in this next section here. The most important task you can do each week to stay caught up on your progress notes, and that is what I've already been talking about, which is literally schedule those notes this week. So do this week's notes. It's very counterintuitive when you're behind in your notes, you want to jump into the catch-up plan, especially if you have ADHD like me, or you're like just feeling really motivated in the moment. You're like, okay, let me do this catch-up stuff. No, you need to do this week's notes first. That is always the key. And often I run groups, catch-up groups. Literally, we call it the paperwork catch-up group for therapists who are behind in their paperwork. And many people jump into that group thinking, okay, like maybe I'm going to, catch up on my 1,200 notes that are due in the next 14 weeks. And they spend the entire first session, which is about 4 months together, just getting their schedule together. And it is hugely valuable. Everyone who does that feels so much better and finds it so helpful. But it's not like the exciting thing to think about, right? We want to think about the catch-up notes, but they really are just not helpful if you're not getting this week's notes done. That's always my priority. So in the catch-up group, we call that home base, which is this week. So anytime you sit down to your computer, you're overwhelmed by paperwork, you don't know where to start with what client or whatever, you can always just think to yourself, today's notes, this week's notes. Let me write this week's notes. So that's always your home base, and that's always the first priority over catching up. And that can be frustrating, and that can extend your catch-up plan. And I will tell you, after doing this with hundreds of therapists, maybe 1,000, is that this is the process, and it does work as long as you prioritize home base first. Then you'll be able to have the mental space and capacity to actually formulate the catch-up plan and get it done effectively. And you'll be faster at writing your notes too, because you'll have worked through all of the barriers to writing notes in general. So I promise it feels counterintuitive, but do this week's notes. All right, so tips for this week's notes. So related to, Andre had asked, AI is really helpful for creating more notation. Which one would you recommend? So I have a few that I like. I will say I have not logged into a lot of the platforms recently, and they are constantly making updates, which is wonderful, but also means that I am constantly behind in what each one has to offer. So I'll tell you based on what the feedback that I get from other therapists. So berries, like the fruit, berries is one that I do get a lot of feedback about, that people tell me they like using. And that one I actually have logged into recently, and I know they have a lot of customizable features. So I really like that. I know if I was using an AI right now for writing progress notes, I would want that. The other one that I hear a lot about that I have not yet tried myself, but I do hear a lot of positive feedback on, is quill therapy notes. And so that's another one you can try out. I think that one, berries and quill, I think, offer dictation as a feature, which can be very helpful if you don't like the task of writing. Which I should have mentioned actually as part of the time management. For some people, writing has always been a struggle, whether that's a learning disability, whether that's English as your second language, and you're writing notes in English. There are a lot of reasons that some people just take longer to write. Ironically, I also have worked with quite a few people who were English majors or journalists in their first career before becoming a therapist. And so people who are who like writing and tend to be wordy also really struggle with keeping their notes succinct and keeping, and so they end up spending a lot of time on their notes too. So, AI can help with all of those things. Let's see, the other one I hear a lot of good feedback about is Blueprint.ai. So, those are ones to check out. And then lastly, another one that I have logged into somewhat recently that I also really like is Heidi Health. So like the name Heidi, Heidi Health. And that one feels very intuitive and is very robust. It almost feels like an EHR when you log in. So that one, and I get good feedback about that. So yes, Andre, berries, Heidi Health, quill, like the writing quill, and Blueprint. I would say those are the four that I get people either asking me questions about or telling me they like a lot. So check those out. And then, of course, talk to colleagues and see if they have recommendations too. Maybe they have discount codes, that kind of thing. Let's see. And then what was your other question? Was about, is WhatsApp video considered HIPAA compliant for CMS? I don't know that specific answer. I don't know if WhatsApp is HIPAA compliant, but I will tell you where you can find that answer, and that is Person-Centered Tech. So if you go over to Person-Centered Tech, they are a great company that I mention probably in almost every video I end up doing, because they have so many great resources related to technology and what is HIPAA compliant, and they stay up on all of this stuff. And so they would be able to answer that question, absolutely. So I would refer you to them instead. Okay, so last tip I have related to, staying caught up on notes is another thing you can try is collaborative documentation. And this often gets kind of like a bad rap, but it's actually it can be very easy to implement, and it is very effective for engaging clients as well as getting your notes done. So there's a lot of positive research around collaborative documentation. And it's kind of funny to read all the positive research when you hear people talk about it negatively a lot. But I would say more recently, I've heard a lot more therapists have a positive experience with it. I think this became a little bit more common when after COVID, because people are on telehealth, they're on their screen and maybe also typing. You're typing a note while you're talking to the client. But collaborative documentation is not, it's a little different from concurrent documentation in that concurrent documentation could be that, right? You're just like talking to someone on telehealth and typing a note, but they're not involved in it at all. Whereas collaborative documentation, the emphasis genuinely is on collaborating with the client. So literally asking them at the end of a session, for example, what was your biggest takeaway from today's session? And many therapists have these kind of rituals for either starting a session or closing out a session. And often those are the best ways to start using collaborative documentation. So use that ritual to actually just document what you're doing in the ritual, because it often does have to do with some kind of update or with what will be happening next, right? And so those are a great place to start. But that often, for many people, especially, some of the time management scenarios we discussed, you may not be able to find sufficient time in your schedule to even get this week's notes done. I have definitely worked with clients where we've gone through how many clients are you seeing each week, at what times are you working, that kind of thing. And there literally is no extra hour to add on to their schedule. And in that scenario, collaborative documentation is the way to go. And so it's a matter of, accepting that and saying this is what I have to do in this season in order to get these notes done. Because we do want to get the notes done, and we want to get them done well. But I also want you to know that it can be a very positive experience and genuinely is a positive experience for most clients and therapists. But I think the more you make it a genuine collaborative process, and I will also say, when I had my private practice, I did have an open notes policy. So all of my clients had access to their notes all the time, which is, still pretty unusual for therapists to do. And it really alleviated a lot of stress for me around that second part of the quote framework, right? Being worried about what others read in your progress notes, because my clients already were reading their notes. So when we did have a records request, that part of things was just non-existent. It didn't stress me out. It didn't worry me. I was able to instead focus on what was the reason for the records request or addressing that, and not kind of freaking out about like, oh, my client's going to read this stuff. What are they going to think? They already had access to all of it all the time. And so that was a side benefit that I found as a clinician. All right. If we have any other questions, I would say now is the time to put those questions in the chat. Legendary Aaron has a question, says, have you had any feedback about Simple Practices note taker feature? Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. I have had mixed feedback specifically about that's the AI that is available in Simple Practice. I know that Therapy Notes also has AI available now, and I'm pretty sure Jane app also has AI available now. I have heard mixed reviews about Simple Practice and Therapy Notes as of right now. However, they are both very new, and that's pretty common with rolling, these platforms out. So I would expect that they would improve, and I would recommend try it out for yourself and see if it's useful. And if you don't like it, there are lots of really great options that we already discussed, Berries, Heidi Health, Quill, Blueprint. Those all seem to be great options for AI if you find that the one inside therapy notes or simple practice isn't working that well yet. It takes time for them to improve those systems. So, it's not you. If you try using it and it doesn't seem to suit you, it might just be that it's still a new system. So a year from now, that'll probably be very different, hopefully, right? But try it out yourself. Like I've talked with people for all of those platforms that like it and people that don't. So it might also just be very dependent on how you write notes at this point. All right. Well, if you are interested in joining us for the Summer Paperwork Blitz, that is happening next week. It is a full week, Monday through Thursday of co-working, and we will be working together to get notes done. So that means we use the Pomodoro technique. We're on Zoom. You see me on the screen like this. You see all the other people. And it's really profound to log in and see all these other therapists doing notes together, and to know that a lot of them are there, not because they're doing today's notes, but because they're stressed about notes, because they hate documentation, because they are behind in their notes and it's a constant struggle. Even just logging in, I have seen this many times where people tear up and are just so excited to see that many therapists working together. So we will be doing that. It's free. So there's no reason not to sign up. You don't have to join us every day. If you can even just attend for an hour on Wednesday, do that. But we'll be working from 9 to 11 a.m. Pacific, which is 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday next week. And so if you're able to join us, we would love to see you there. Like I said, you don't have to be there the whole time. So go ahead and harness the power of this community, and know that you're not alone in this struggle. And we would love to see you at the Paperwork Blitz. All right. Any other questions that we have? Because I saw Isela post another question. Now is your time to last minute get those in. Isela said, when catching up on notes, how do you document that the note was written late? Have you seen this cause problems for the therapist, such as with licensing boards, subpoenas, audits, etc.? Okay. So this is a fun question. The key question there is, what is late? So how do you document that the note was written late? I don't know that you need to document that the note was written late. It really depends on, is it technically late? And who is deciding that? Most states and professional associations have no guidance. There are ethics guidelines that say to do notes in a timely manner. There is zero direction as to what that means. That is completely up for interpretation. So that's a good thing if you're behind in your notes. However, there are people who do have requirements for notes. So I don't want to, pretend that you can just sign notes, write notes whenever. You might have contracts. You might have, some other entity that is in charge of what you do in some way, and they might say when notes are due. So that is important to mention. You might have a Medicare contract, for example, that says that notes have to be in within 48 hours. So it's important to know what entities are actually in control of what you do or influencing what you do. And if they have a guideline, then yes, you want to stick with that. Beyond that, if you're just in generic private practice, your state doesn't say when notes are due. Your ethics board, I can tell you, doesn't say that. Your ethics board might say that notes have to be timely. I think it's NASW that says that, but literally does not identify a time frame. And other ethics boards do not identify a time frame at all, or even say that they have to be timely. They just say that they have to be done. So if there is no actual standard or guidance on what late means, I don't think it's in your best interest or anyone's best interest to say that your notes are late, because according to who? So that's something I got from an attorney, Eric Strom, who says, what's your source? So always looking at that. What is your source for what is a late note? So if you don't have any of those hanging over your head, then I wouldn't even worry about it. I would just get the note done as soon as possible, obviously. Have I seen it cause problems for therapists? I have seen it come up, and then that's always the argument, right? Is where is the source, and no one can point to the source. So I have seen it become an issue in audits, and that's when like the insurance company has clearly stated that's part of the requirements. So that's another story. And yes, they will check those types of things like dates, times. Those are kind of quick, easy wins for them if they can catch errors with things like that. So if you do have a contract that states that, you want to prioritize getting those notes in on time, because that is something they'll likely check, because that makes it very easy for them to disallow without even really needing to read a note. But for other things, I really don't think that it is that big of an issue. All right, I think that's our last question. So we would love to see you at the Summer Paperwork Blitz. Even if you're watching this later, but you want that catch-up plan template, go ahead and sign up. I will put the link in here one more time for the Summer Paperwork Blitz. It's free, so we would love to see you there and get some co-working done with us. Thank you for being here, and as always, happy writing.